Welcome, everybody, to the third installment in the hopefully weekly MetaShift series brought to you guys by Monolith Duelyst with Nagrit and myself. And this week, as per usual, we have some very, very special guests with us to discuss the latest changes in the world of Duelyst, aka Patch 63. This week, we have with us the one and only master of Songhai Cancer, ZoochZ, on the show. Hey, ZoochZ, welcome.
Hello.
And of course, once again, like with scientists, because we just can't get enough of him, we got Ryvirath back in here to join us this week, give us some of his opinions. What's up, Riv?
Hey, not too much. Glad to be back.
Yeah, it's cool to have you back. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into this. We got quite a couple of things to talk about. Patch 63 has been a big one. I guess just before we really get into it, I'll give you guys an opportunity to just give a little bit of background about yourselves for those viewers who might not know who you are already. ZoochZ, how about you first?
All right. Well, I joined Duelyst back in November when there was that big influx from a random Reddit post. And since then, I've been a pretty big person on the tournament scene. I'd like to say I've won 3 King of the Betas, a bunch of other tournaments, and finished second in a bunch of tournaments as well. And this first Snow Chasers Cup, I think I lost a total of 5 games the entire tournament. Just so happened 3 of them were in the same top 8 match. But
dang, yeah, you did really well there. I must say, I got to check out some of that. Riv, how about you? If the viewers don't know who you are already, just give them a little bit of background.
All right, so hey guys, I'm Ryvirath. I've been playing for quite a while now. Unfortunately, my tournament scene isn't as populated as ZoochZ is, but the ones that I have joined, I've gotten top 2, I've won, and then a couple other top 8s. And past that, I just do a fair bit of streaming. I do a lot of stuff on the Discord, hang out a lot, and just try to play the game as best as possible.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, let's get right into it. We'll kick off with our first segment as usual in the MetaShift. We're going to talk about first impressions. So, ZoochZ, the patch notes came out for patch 63 after much delay, less delay than last time. Yeah. What were your first impressions when you had a look at the patch notes for patch 63?
So I guess to put this in perspective, to address the earliest patch notes when they made the switch from 2 draws to 1 draw, I was very reluctant to give my opinions on that. I wasn't as big a fan of that change, and I guess it puts into perspective when I say I really like this change. If this was Counterplay's overarching plan, I think it worked out perfectly. I was very excited to sit down and play with a lot of the generals. It seems like it opens up a lot of deck building options. I have some minor concerns that we'll end up seeing either standard decks where, if you're playing as X General, you're always going to want to play these certain cards, or, X General is just better than another general in the same faction. But so far, it hasn't seemed like that's come to pass. So I'm very excited about these.
Riv, how about you? What do you think?
I was a big fan of the initial change as well, the initial patch with the 1 draw. And this patch just, added on to my happiness of it, where I really like the direction that Duelyst is going. I was pretty burnt out when it was the 2 draw, just, tempo, like all these 2 drops, stuff like that. So the change has been really cool for me, and especially with the hero powers. I just like a lot of deck building possibilities that they open up, and how a lot of them are very good in a lot of different situations. And aside from 1 or 2 outliers, none of them are specifically better than the other a lot of the time, which is really cool, especially on the first round of a new mechanic implementation. To have it be this correct that quickly is a really cool, and it's awesome as a player.
Okay, so speaking about these Bloodborne spells, this is the first important thing we really need to talk about as far as key changes go, right? So not only did we have the introduction of 6 alternate generals, we also had the introduction of Bloodborne spells for the old generals and the new ones. So I'd like to hear some of you guys' opinions about these Bloodborne spells, how it conceptually changes the way one approaches playing the game. Let's start again with you, ZoochZ. What's your take on the addition of the Bloodborne spells?
So I think the first thing that they do is that they address one of the biggest complaints of the switch to the one draw rule, which is you have nothing to do in the late game. So if you're just top decking, it seems to really exacerbate issues with randomness. What the Bloodborne spells do is they address that. They give you at least something else to do. So even if you're not drawing the perfect spell, you can still, pump your general's power, or add a shadow creep tile to the board, or deal 2 damage to the opposing general. It really adds a little bit of something to do later in the game, which I think is great. In terms of how they all play out, I mean, they obviously all play out differently. I'm personally a really big fan of both the Abyss and Vinar generals, but I do think that there are some hidden gems. So when I first... Am I getting off topic? Do you want me to just give my impression?
No, that's good. No, it's good. It's good. That's what we want to hear.
When I first sort of took a look at all the generals, I was a little disappointed with the Songhai generals for a couple reasons. I would have liked to have seen one that focused a little bit more on the spell high aspect of the faction, and it didn't seem like either of them did that. And Kalios's in particular seem pretty underwhelming compared to a lot of the other generals. So like with Kara, for example, you're getting a benefit every time you use that ability. With Kalios, you might get a benefit or you might not. That having been said, seeing it in action, it seems pretty powerful. I haven't seen all of the generals in action. I do have one sort of critique on the generals, and it comes in with comparing the 2 Vitruvian generals. Just in my personal opinion, it seems like Xerix is just going to be overwhelmingly better than Saj for the most part in time. You can almost always get the same effect unless you're using artifacts. So it seems like Saj is just going to be the artifact general. I don't know. I wish there was something that was a little bit more distinct, but I can understand that they want to promote that as a faction sort of archetype. So I guess I'm fine with that as well. But it just seems in general, if you're going to build a non-dervish, non-artifact Vitruvian deck, you would just necessarily choose Xerix because 99% of the time his ability is going to be better than hers.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are starting to draw that conclusion. I mean, it's early days, and as we know, things take time to refine, but it's not as instantly efficient and versatile. Her hero power, you'd think that it is. It's really powerful, but you really have to consider what Vitruvian is trying to do usually. And if you do want to go with the artifact route, there are drawbacks to that. And they can't just be solved by allowing you to do double damage to minions in a turn. But we'll see. Perhaps something interesting comes out of it. Riv, what's your take on the Bloodborne spells and the generals, and is there anything interesting that stands out?
I mean, yeah, there's also interesting stuff. So a lot of people have already drawn their primary conclusions. Kara is really good. Xerix is godly. Caspia is good. Lilith is godly. Those are definitely the major ones that have been popping up, especially right now without too much experimentation going on. But a lot of them are just very interesting. I actually think one of the more subtle ones that is actually really, really cool is actually Boss. It's pretty low key. It doesn't do anything major. It doesn't pop. It's just +1 attack on the general. That's cool. But what's really cool about it is the idea behind it is if you're playing control, then what you're getting back is anytime they trade into you to try to do damage, because presumably you're going to win the control fight, they are then spending you're retaliating for a lot more damage, so that you're getting better trades into their minions, and generally they might even be suiciding themselves for 1 attack instead of 2. So you're coming out way further ahead on the health scale on that regard, and just stuff like that, really subtle things for the Bloodborne cards are really cool to me like that. Boss is probably the coolest for that, but there's a couple others that are just really neat. Kalios is another one I'm a huge fan of because it gives a lot of subtle board control. They have to position a lot more. They have to position quite a bit differently because you have 2 extra spaces of movement on any one creature, and it opens up just a lot of deck building and playstyle opportunities that weren't there before.
Yeah, I think that what both of you guys mentioned there is what's excited me the most as well. As deck building is something that I love, and I think that there are many people in the community that really enjoy the deck building aspect of the game. And what the Bloodborne spells seem to have done is to really promote some unique approaches to deck building. And you would be foolish, for example, to just try and build a deck without trying to actually benefit off of this Bloodborne spell. And that means you've got to make some different choices about what you're going to put in your deck. We still in a one-card draw format here, so you still need card draw. But now your battle plan needs to be adjusted. Just chunking in a bunch of neutrals to get value is not necessarily the best way to go. You're going to get the edge from those Bloodborne spells. Nanger, tell me, you've also been testing a lot. Is there anything that stood out to you from the addition of the Bloodborne spells?
Well, obviously, every one of the Bloodborne spells from the generals is based around a specific, more or less specific deck archetype from the faction the general is from. Like with Magmar, Starhorn is more based around the more aggressive style of play, with more like aggro deck, and Vath, as already mentioned by Ryvirath, around a more controlled style deck. And so that's really interesting. So basically the Bloodborne spells promote these deck archetypes even further and strengthen them in what they do. So that's a really interesting approach, and you actually can really build your deck around this archetype.
So tell me, Zooch, you mentioned something earlier, and I just want to address it briefly. You said that you do have this one concern, right, about the potential for these Bloodborne spells to kind of shoehorn the way these decks are built, these archetypes are approached. Do you think that, it's obviously a natural reaction to have, right? If you have a bit of knowledge about how card games work and you play the game a lot, I think it's a natural reaction. My question is, do you foresee it becoming a real problem?
Well, no, I don't. I don't think so. I think there's enough variety in Duelyst, both in terms of having 40 cards in your deck to build with and enough different cards that do different things. I'm not really concerned that we're going to have cookie cutter decks based entirely off of a Bloodborne spell. But for example, with something like Kara, or we'll take Kara for example, something like Ash Mephit all of a sudden becomes a hugely awesome card in that deck. Like if you use your Bloodborne spell twice, all of a sudden you're spending 5 mana and putting 3 4/5s on the board. Like that's incredibly powerful. So moving forward, it would seem like a deck that wants Kara as its general might automatically think, I probably want 3 of these Ash Mephits in my deck because it's going to be so good. I don't know as if it's going to necessarily dictate how every deck is built. And in fact, I think as time goes on, because I'm going to address one thing in 1 second, we'll come to see that they're not as overwhelmingly dictating how people build their decks. But for right now, I see that some people are going to immediately latch on to specific cards like Repulsor Beast is great in cast because you can you're almost always going to have a Shadow Nova space on the board, so it's almost tantamount to a removal spell at that point in time. One thing that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about is the fact that these aren't spells that you can use right from the get-go. You can only use them on your 3rd, 5th, 7th turn moving forward. You can use them every turn once you hit 9 mana. I think this is important to note because there were a lot of, not necessarily complaints, but observations that depending on the meta, if the meta is hyper aggressive, you're only going to get 1 or 2 uses out of these spells sometimes, right? If you're trying to stave off an opposing aggressive deck. So if the meta turns out to be extremely aggressive, they might be less impactful than people are thinking.
That's a good point. Riv, do you have something to add to this?
Oh, for sure. I agree with what Zuch is saying, though, completely. I'm one of the people who's definitely saying, Bloodborne spells are not the be-all, end-all for deck building. Like a lot of people are saying right now, you don't have to go completely around them. And I think that, especially moving forward, so I agree, especially for the Ash Mephit thing. When you're playing Kara, you probably want to play Ash Mephit. And I think that style of building is true. With X you want Y, but you don't always want Y with X. So let's take a look at cast, for example, right? So
Yep.
what she does is she deals 1 damage, and if the creature dies, it produces a Shadow Creep. So the natural way to build then is to put Shadow Novas in your deck. You want to make use of that creep. But I feel like going forward that while that might still be the case in the future, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It could be, oh, I'm going to play Cast because I want to be able to deal 1 damage to control the board. It's very useful for pinging, rather than, oh, I need it for the Shadow Creep so that I can play my Shadow Novas. So whereas Ash Method is really good with Kara, Shadow Novas don't necessarily have to be really good with Cast. There's more, there's more deck building opportunities than people are currently doing, and I think that's going to evolve going forward so that you don't see he's playing this general, I know he's playing this type of deck. It's going to vary a little bit more than that in the future.
Right. No, I tend to agree with you, and once again I think it's the kind of status quo approach when you hit with such fundamental changes again, especially in such a short period of time post patch 61. So in the past 4 to 5 weeks, we've had so many changes. So I think it's natural people will start to gravitate toward the obvious lines of deck building, but I think that will diversify, and that's what excites me a hell of a lot moving forward. Let's have a look at some of the nerfs that have happened here as well. If you guys were put on the spot, right, and Zooch, I'm gonna put you on the spot right here. If out of the cards that have been nerfed, right, which 3 of the nerfs you really saw as being super impactful changes?
Well, I will not waste anyone's time and talk about Tuskvor, because that's clearly my favorite card in the game, and I'm sad to see it go. I don't know if it's going to be unplayable. I don't know if it'll be playable, but it was certainly the most powerful 2-drop in the game. So
For sure.
I don't know if it's going to maintain that mantle or not. I actually I had broken mine down into 5 most important cards, but if I had to do 3, what I would say are the following. Saberspine Tiger. When Saberspine Tiger was a 4/1, it was everywhere. I mean, literally every deck, the aggressive decks had it, and the control decks had it, because it was just basically a 3-mana spell that dealt 4 damage, whether that's a removal spell or killing your opponent. I was always trying to play around, well, what if my opponent has 2 tigers in their hand? Because every deck had tigers. As a 3/2, it's still very powerful, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be as ubiquitous as it was as a 4/1. I really like this change as well, because as a 4/1, it basically had one function, either deal damage to their face or kill something. As a 3/1 or as a 3/2, you have a little bit more strategy. So if you use it to pick off, say, a Heartseeker or another 1-powered creature, you're getting so much value out of that tiger because it sticks around. I really like it as a 3/2. The other creature that I would want to say is in the top 3 is Primus Fist. Before the patch, when Primus Fist's pump was permanent, it was also likewise everywhere, because it was such a powerful ability. If you were using it to trade a lower minion to kill off a bigger minion, I mean, that's awesome. And the best part is you didn't have to do it right away. You could, replace a Dream Gazer turn 1 and then pump your Dream Gazer, and that's such value. And now it's still a quality minion, but I don't think it's going to be quite as ubiquitous as it was before, which I think opens up a lot of deck building. And finally, I guess I would say Dream Gazer. That was another neutral minion that was everywhere. It wasn't quite as ubiquitous as the first 2 cards I mentioned, but unlike Tiger and Primus Fist, which I think we'll still see play, I have concerns that Dream Gazer might have been hit a little bit too hard with the Nerf Hammer. It's a 1/1, which really doesn't do a whole lot, and I don't know. It just seems like it's not worth the deck spot anymore. I would have maybe liked to have seen it become a 2/1 or a 1/2 instead of dropping all the way down to a 1/1. But I don't know. I'm happy to see it go. I've always hated Dream Gazer.
So, having heard those, Riv, which of the nerfs stood out to you?
Just nerfs, not change, not like changes, eh?
Well, changes as well.
Okay,
but I
cool.
mean,
Sweet. That means I can talk about my favorite faction. So let's talk about Vitruvian.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Also my favorite faction. Yeah.
As far as Vitruvian goes, I actually really like the changes, and that's why I was asking for changes, not nerfs, because I don't think either of the wishes were nerfed. I think they were changed. Yeah, the Dervish one is probably a nerf. Let's be honest. But what these changes have done is they put a new deck on the map for Aggro-Vet, and it's actually really cool. It's a very reasonably, it's very, very strong, but it's also very reasonable, which is something Vet hasn't been said about Vet for a long time, but it's been reasonable. The 2/2 Silent Second Wish is a little bit unfair, but it's not, it's Dark's Fury, Third Wish for game, and it's not, Blast Tiger for game. And yeah, so what these changes have done is they've made Aggro-Vet something where you can really push aggressively, and you use Third Wish as an ender, and it being a +3/+3 and flying is actually very cool, because what it allows you to do is it allows you to use Xeric's Bloodborne ability, the +2/2 little Doom Cat or little Dervish, and it lets you do a 5/5 ender with flying, which is really strong. And then the 2/2 with can't be damaged by enemy generals is also very strong, and they all just work really well together. Vet feels really nice right now in the way it all works. And that's something that hasn't really been true for Vet for a long time. They've had power cards that have helped carry the faction, but everything kind of melds together right now to just feel really good. And as far as another change goes, as far as nerfs goes, the other biggest nerf by far is the Archon Spellbinder nerf. So 7/9 to 7/7. That's pretty massive. First off, it dies to Power Pony or Power Unicorn. And I mean, that alone is kind of a problem, because I'm pretty sure that card's going to see a lot more play.
Yeah.
And just a 7/7 means it dies to a lot more stuff. That 2 health actually makes a phenomenal amount of difference in terms of its viability and playability and impact on the board. 7/7 is a much easier amount to deal with, and I've known a lot of people already are starting to drop it. I don't know that that's going to be the case forever. I think it might just be a bit of a, oh wow, it's not as strong as it used to be, I'm dropping it type of thing. But it's definitely a choice now, especially in Lionar, you can run Elix instead. That's definitely a choice now. Before that was not a choice.
I had a long discussion with someone the other day after playing a match, and it was a Lionar mirror, incidentally. And I was running Elix, he was running Archons, and my Elix won me the game. Especially, I got an Aegis barrier on it, but after the game, he said to me, wow, yeah, he's been thinking about it, and he doesn't see now why he shouldn't try running Elixes instead. I mean, the stats are the same, and it gives mobility to Lionar, which is something that they can always benefit from. So definitely, I think it's a very valid point. I think Archon is still a strong card.
Yeah, and that's
make no mistake, but it's not broken.
Yeah,
the stats before were just...
You're not I'm playing aggro, I'm playing Archon. Oh, I'm playing control, I'm playing Archon. Now it's, do I need to stop my enemy spells or disrupt them? For sure, I'm going to play Archon. It's a 7/7 for 7 or for 6. That's still not bad. It's just not ridiculously better than everything else.
I like that it's a choice now as well. I think that's key. Zoot, you want to say something?
Yeah, so I wanted to comment on one of the cards that Ryvirath talked about, which is Scion's Second Wish. Of all the cards that they changed, that's the one that I'm most fearful of being overpowered. So it's such a powerful ability. If you use your early minion to pump it and then clear their whole board, suddenly you've got this just giant creature that their general can't clear off the board. I worry about that. I haven't seen it in action yet, so I don't know. But putting it on a tiger and smashing them for 5 and they can't clear it, that seems insane to me. That seems very powerful.
Yeah,
it generates additional value, right? Because before you would just, if you buff something, it would trade, and then normally what the opponent would try and do is just tap it down with his general attack and start developing board. Now he can't do that, and if he doesn't deal with it, it's going to get even more value, reducing his board and allowing you who played it to get initiative yet again. So I think it's definitely, it's a bit of a sleeper card. People look at, and I've heard comparisons to, it's like a Greater Fortitude with a Silvertongue Corsair effect. It's like a Boundless card. You can't compare it like that. It's not. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
I think
you can't look at it in a vacuum, right?
Right.
Nankit?
Also, it kind of can be compared to Boundless Courage in a sense, but it's way stronger for the same mana cost because it actually gives the health buff as well. And a lot of early game minions you would give this buff to would die to Dancing Blades the following turn, which they don't do after the buff for the health as well. So that's a really strong point on it as well.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. So since we're talking about changes, we might as well have a look at some of the cards that really like stood out to you guys. As these are the cards that are going to be really powerful in the upcoming month's metagame. This time we'll kick off with you, Riv. Can you give me like a top 3?
Just for like the cards that I think are going to be like really
Yeah.
strong. Going forward, like after this month, right?
Yeah, of course. For the upcoming month's metagame.
Okay, so on 7. Let's talk about on 7.
Yeah,
For after
please.
this month. So on 7's going to be pretty strong. 2/4 Duelyst, summon another like mini with Dying, which is pretty good. It's appropriate cost at 4 mana, and I think it's going to free the Zenrui meta. I think you play Zenrui or you get on 7 and you feel really bad because on 7 has so many viable targets. Like if you can play Vet, it hits Amara, it hits both Styx, I guess. You could play, play in an Abyss, it hits Reaver, it hits Reaper. It has so many good targets. You Zenrui or die with this card, and I just see it being a massive card going forward into next month, for sure. After that, the other biggest card so far that's been really showing up in a lot of decks is Deal Toss. Deal Toss is a pretty good card now at a 5/3. It was always pretty okay still. Like, it was never bad. It was just, it died to a 2-drop, and then, you got an 0/10 and that got dispelled, and you felt bad. Now, as a 5/3, like, maybe it gets Dancing Blade still, but it's not trading with 2-drops, like, free. And the 0/10 Provoke is becoming a lot more valuable in this meta as well as it's developing. And the bigger body is just really useful, even for factions that aren't inherently buffing it, like a Lionar with Divine Bond. Even outside of those, the 0/10 is still finding a lot of use, which is really, really cool. As for, like, another buff, though, yeah, I don't know. I guess I guess we could talk about Captain Hank Hart. That's a pretty good buff. It went from 5 to 4. That's a lot more viable now. You can play it before Dancing Blades, and Dancing Blades won't kill it. That's really strong. But no, Sunsteel Defender actually is what I want to talk about. That is realistically, it was kind of a nerf because Celerity was pretty stupid, but I think the card is actually really good. A 4/3 is aggressively appropriately costed for what it does because it's going to force out at least an answer from the opponent. It's never a free kill. Being a 4/3 with Force Field means they're always going to spend something. So you can play it down aggressively, and especially in something like Kara, which buffs it, which then increases its value like tenfold to not die to Dancing Blades. It's really good. I guess it's still technically a nerf, but it's more widely played than just in I'm playing this in Songhai and going to try to OTK you. I'm going to aggressively use this and burn your resources down. Really, really strong.
Yeah, its function has changed, right? And
Yeah.
and what's also interesting is that now it's a 4-drop, which, although 4-drops are slightly less important as they were, say, a patch or 2 ago, in certain decks that are really hurting for interesting 4-drops, if they're not running Primus Shieldmaster already, if they want a more aggressive option, Sunsteel it's a really viable option. Like you said, in Caravanar, that card can really get you some value quick. Also in Lionar, if you play Argent Hymen, I've been testing it out, and I've actually been getting tremendous value off of it in the 4 slot, and I can place it relatively aggressively. And if it's not dealt with, well, next turn it turns into a 6/3. And now it's sniping off mid-range to helping to trade with late-game bombs. I think it's underrated, actually. Just because it's not an OTK kind of card anymore doesn't mean that it's not still really good. I think it was a pretty, what do you call it, a heads-up nerf on Counterplay's behalf with that card. So, Zooch, your turn. Top cards that stand out to you.
So I actually, instead of talking about the specific changes that they made, do you mind if I mention cards that I think that are already existing that didn't change, but I think get better because of the changes? So there are a couple cards that I immediately was like, this card went from okay to substantially better. Lightbender has always been, before it was an unplayable card. After the 1-draw change, it became pretty playable. Now I think it's just super playable because it deals with all sorts of the Bloodborne spells. It deals with Cass's Shadow Nova. It deals with Voth's Pump. It deals with Kara's Pumping or the Creatures. I see this card being everywhere because it just deals with generals. Like, period. Another card that I haven't heard anyone talk about, but I think might be really cool moving forward is Prismatic Illusionist, because all the Bloodborne spells trigger it, so you're always going to get a 2/1 off of it. So you're essentially paying 3 mana for a 4/4 worth of stats. That seems pretty solid for me. And then there are a couple in-faction cards that I think get a lot better because of the Bloodborne spells as well. Black Soulless, obviously. Spirit Harvester, because it sort of nerfs Lilith's effect and Riva's effect. If you need me to talk about a specific, let's see, which card did they bump up that I want to talk about? Oh, Mesmerize. I'm excited to see what Mesmerize does, because that seems like such a unique effect. Aside from, I think, Pado, no other card in the game moves a general. And that's so powerful. You can move them onto your side of the board, an avalanche. You can move a bunch of their creatures into line and use Phase ability to knock them all down. I'm really excited to see if Mesmerize is as good as I hope it is.
Yeah, definitely. It emphasizes that identity that you feel was kind of inherent when they designed Vanar the first time round, right? Which is a faction focused on trying to zone you, get advantage, and force you into awkward positioning. And the combination of having cards like Mesmerize, having the Warbird ability, which some people are thinking is basically just to go face, but it's so much more than that, I think. We're going to see people come up with some really clever ideas how to manipulate positioning and how to force zoning into their advantage and to make the opponent's turn very awkward using these cards. And I think Mesmerize at 1 mana especially, it's so handy. It's so handy. Is there anything else that stood out to you, Zooch? Anything really...
Of the changes that they made? And do you want to hear about cards that were buffed? So one card that I haven't seen played yet, and I haven't heard anyone talk about yet, is the change to Songweaver. I don't know as to whether that card is suddenly... Like, it was always played in a combo deck with Sunsteel Defender or Dagger Kiri to sort of OTK someone from across the board. I think Songweaver might be really good. Like, you're paying 3 mana for a 3/3 and a 1/1 counter on something else. That's 3 mana for 4 stats. That's really good value. And it gives you tempo. I would be surprised if Songweaver didn't turn out to be pretty good. Other than that, Mana Forger, that change isn't that big of a deal. Like Ryvirath said, I think Dial to Us is probably pretty good now. I think Abyssal Juggernaut is probably pretty good now too, since it's almost more likely to kill off opposing minions. It certainly seems much more of a Juggernaut nowadays than a 3/6 was. But those are my picks if I had to choose from what they specifically changed.
So, Nagger, is there anything that we haven't touched upon that's really stood out to you?
I mean, I think we touched on all the changes they made, but something that was mentioned like on a side note before was Senrui, which I think for next month got buffed with the new cards coming in and with some of the changes, because like in a meta where N7 is a often used card, it can swing games. Like when you rely on N7 to get a big minion out early, and it gets stolen, it can swing the game. It also can steal other important minions like Fox, or in a more dervish-based Vitruvian, it can steal obelisks, which is also really good. So I think Senrui could also see a lot of play next month.
Yeah, I fully agree with you on that. So I'm quite curious, and Riv, I'm gonna put you on the spot first for a change. If you had to give a piece of advice to everybody out there who's going to be trying to come up with creative deck lists, what kind of advice would you give them?
Honestly, just have fun with it right now, especially. There's so much room for creativity and so much room for just kind of doing what you want to do and seeing how it'll work out. There is no real bad thing to do. Like, yeah, try to follow some basic deck building stuff so it doesn't like crash and burn. Run like 9/2 drops. Don't run like entire like 1 cost and like 0 cost deck because you're gonna run out of steam. But beyond that, like especially right now with the way the general button powers are and all the changes, it's a really cool time to just kind of be able to run what you want. I've seen so many different builds of things. Like I've seen Arcanist Vinaras, I've seen so many different types of Songhai, so many different types of Songhai. It's a really cool time, and just get out there, grind games, and enjoy yourself. Especially, like I said, especially right now, you might find the next OP thing. You might find something that works for you. There's so much room just to put your own mark on the game right now.
Stitch, how about you? Any piece of advice for aspiring deck builders?
Well, I would say, first of all, don't think that you have to abandon decks you've already built just because there are these changes. I think that you could play, pre-patch decks just fine. Don't think that this is world-shattering and that you have to go back to the drawing board necessarily. That being said, I think for people who are really interested in deck building, it's sort of a golden age for you because there's really no meta. There's really nothing that people are working off of. So, yeah, like Ryve said, you could find the next broken thing and it would be awesome. I guess if I had to offer a specific piece of advice, it would be see what synergies you can come up with. Like the Ash Mephit thing is the one I keep going back to, but that was something that I didn't think about, and it blew my mind when someone played it against me, and I promptly lost. I was like, wow, that was awesome. And so, yeah, coming up with these sort of like underused cards, maybe that's my point of advice. Reanalyze everything, because the cards that you thought maybe were not powerful enough to give a first thought to might now have like a niche application in a specific general that is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Counterplay in their statement concerning patch 61 said that one of their objectives was to increase diversity and make people rethink some of these cards that have just been gathering dust in their collections. And I think that's even more true now. And they must have had in mind that patch 61 was step 1 moving toward what we have now. And now that statement is really true. Those cards that have been lying around, you gotta just rethink it. Think outside of the box. Don't be afraid to try things. In a more general sense then, guys, let's talk about big winners and big losers. I mean, in terms of factions, that is. Like, it's still early days. We're about 36 hours or so, a little bit more into this this new era of Duelyst yet again. But if you guys had to venture a guess, who would you think the big winners and big losers in terms of factions seem to be at this point? Riv, I'll kick it off with you. Give me a big winner and a big loser, and why you think so.
I think Vet is a big winner because I think everyone thought they were going to die, me included. I thought the nerfs were going to be way worse than they were, and I think Vet came out like a thief. Like they were just like, my reign of power continues. They barely missed a step, man. Like, aggro Vet is so good. It's a tier 1 deck, no doubt. It definitely has some problem matchups. It's a lot more fair, but considering that Vet and Songhai have been switching on and off from being the best deck month after month, the fact that Vet is still continuing that trend, or more than likely still continuing that trend, means they just won out really hard compared to a lot of other stuff. As for losers, I guess we'll talk about the other part of that. Songhai. I think Songhai got not destroyed. I don't think they got wrecked, but I don't think they came out ahead. The Tuskboard nerf hurt. A lot of the other changes hurt. Just in general, their Bloodborne powers, while very cool and very good, are not, they're not Lilith, they're not Xerix, they're not to that tier, and they can't capitalize on damage as well as they used to be able to compared to now with both the Tiger nerf and Tuskboard nerf. So I think Songhai is finally going to take a little bit, they've been singing a song and they're finally lulling themselves to sleep. They're going to chill for a bit, be like mid-tier, they're not going to rise up for a bit, I don't think, but we'll see. But I definitely would say they're the biggest loser in terms of going from being the consistently best faction or second best faction, depending on which month it was for Vet and Songhai, to being a middle of the pack, I think.
Sitch, how about you? Big winner, big loser?
So for my winners, I had Abyss and Vinar. I think both generals for each faction got really powerful Bloodborne abilities. And not only powerful, but like interesting and synergistic. So I don't know if you haven't played against a Lilith, it's just incredibly powerful. Like, they just spam the board and then play a Deathfire Crescendo on one of their Wraithlings, and all of a sudden you're dead. Like, it's so good.
It's so true.
As for losers, unfortunately, I have to agree. Songhai, I think, got a little bit of the short end of the stick, both in terms of neither power is really all that exciting. I know a lot of people were really excited about Riva's, but she sort of gets beat up by a lot of other powers. Like, I don't know, especially Cass. Like, you just can't use your Bloodborne power against Cass ever, or else I just get a free, shadow.
One mana, give Cass a creep tile. Yeah.
And Tuskborn nerfed. I'm going to obviously try to explore that faction a bit because it's my favorite. The only other faction that I would say didn't really make out as well is maybe Magmar. Don't get me wrong, I really like both of their abilities, and I think that they have decks that they can build on, but they're not as... They just don't strike me as powerful as some of the other ones. Like, Starhorns is... each player gets one. It's not like only you get to draw a card. It's symmetrical. That's the word I was looking for. And then Vats, I think, is actually kind of cool and very powerful, but it can be dispelled, which seems like, you're spending, 3 or 4 turns building up your general, and all of a sudden, Ephemeral Shroud comes out, and you just wasted all that time and mana. So, I'm excited about Magmar. I think that they have the most open-ended Bloodborne spells in terms of deck building, so that intrigues me. But in terms of power-wise, I think they came out a little bit on the lower end of power.
Very interesting. So to wrap it up then, guys, I'd like to hear from each one of you one archetype to look out for in the upcoming month's metagame. We're going to put Nagard on the spot for a change here. Nagard, what are we looking out for? One archetype.
Yeah, as I've played it a lot today as well, aggro Vitruvian is definitely really strong, and with obelisks being definitely viable, and only with Lightbender basically as its real opposing factor, I think aggro Vitruvian can really win a lot of games this season, and especially next season as well.
Okay. Riv?
Can I do one archetype and one card? Because there's actually a card I want to talk about as well.
Sure.
Okay, so as for archetype, Big Abyss definitely is something you need to look out for. It's already making massive waves. It's going to keep making waves. It's a consistently good deck. It doesn't have that power curve low that it used to have, or the consistency issues, where, in the mid game you're kind of struggling to have any board presence and having any minions. So, yeah, they don't have that issue anymore. They get 2/1/1 Wraithlings, that puts some meat on the board, that makes Deathfire Crescendo a little bit better, makes Priestess better. It just makes overall their entire game plan a lot more smooth and synergistic, and damn scary with Crescendo. And as for cards, everyone needs to keep a lookout for Hollow Grovekeeper. Hollow Grovekeeper is mad good. That card is actually amazing. I've been playing in almost everything. I've been running a Zenruli Grovekeeper removal suite. It's really good. Trust me. Try it out. It deals with everything. Like, everyone's like, I'm going to play all of these provokes, all of them. And you're like, all right, here's the Grovekeeper. It's really good, and I don't see it getting any worse as the months go forward. Screw Primus Shield.
Yeah, we were joking about it amongst ourselves as well. It's time to get those Grovekeepers out that have been lying dormant for a month or so.
Dude, I crafted
Looks
one
like
like
the
2 days
time's
ago
come.
when I was testing this, or a day and a half ago.
Yep. Zoch, how about you? One archetype to look out for.
So to piggyback on that, Hollow Grovekeeper was my number 3 sort of card that didn't change, but probably got a lot better. It just kills Primus Shieldmasters everywhere. So if you can nerf that, oh man. So the deck that I've been playing, I've been starting at the first general and moving my way down. I made a video today, which I just uploaded to YouTube, of aggro Argeon, which I think is pretty strong. You're running some, aggressively costed minions. His hero or his Bloodborne spell does a lot of damage on something like Azurite Lion. So you can really push a lot of damage through pretty quick. If I had to do maybe a off-the-wall archetype that I wanted to see if it was viable, I think Riva Deathstrike might be really good. Because you can just put 3 Deathstrikes in your deck, and late game you can summon a Heartseeker and just start picking off things. And Deathstrike has always been a pet card of mine. And if you're already starting with 3 Death Strike seals, you can play cards like White Widow or Bone Reaper, and just sort of
Jade
like
Monk.
Jade Monk, just come out of nowhere to start like killing giant minions for free. So
Yeah.
I don't know if
we
it's good enough, but
Well, I mean, we saw our teammate for Team Wars, Mogwai. He has been testing out. He's been loving this Death Strike idea for quite a while.
Oh,
and
really?
He's running the Bone Reapers. He's got the Jade Monks.
Oh,
and he is
exciting.
just kicking ass with it. So I believe you. I think it's going to be a thing, especially if people start playing. The moment people start playing more mid-range creatures and larger units, the value that you get of putting a Death Strike seal on a ranged minion and killing one of these bombs, it could be game winning on its own, just like that. It's an incredible control tool. Yep. Was there anything else that you wanted to add there, Zooch?
No, that's it.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for taking the time out to join us today on the show, guys. As I said, it's such a privilege to have you guys take time out. We hope to see a lot of really interesting decks from you guys in the future. And for you guys who didn't know about them already, go and check out any content that they do. We will be providing links in the description below. And we're going to catch you guys next time round, where we're probably going to talk about some more interesting things with more special guests. Take it easy, guys.
Later.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.